Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's live stream. Uh, you are tuning into Refining Exegetics. I'm your host, Jared Kasperi. And tonight's live stream, the title is Psalm 102 reapplied to the Son in Hebrews 1:10 through 12. And this is going to be a textual and contextual reassessment of Hebrews 1:2 through 13. The reason why I am doing this live stream and going over this passage is I have done a little bit already regarding Hebrews 1, and this is an important text to me because there is a lot of confusion regarding traditional readings of this passage among Trinitarians uh, um, and also some confusion among those who aren't Trinitarians. And uh, a lot of that stems from just not understanding the the discourse that's going on in Hebrews 1 in the context of the entire book. And I'm gonna give a presentation at the beginning of this live stream going through chapter 1. There's going to be some areas that I'm going to be focusing on, obviously, Hebrews 1:10 through 12, but also Hebrews 1:2, um, but really laying out the discourse structure and the rhetorical flow of the inclusio, what's normally called the inclusio, verses 5 through 13. So, uh, and then I'm going to be opening up uh, the opportunity for those who are in listening in uh, to come on and discuss whether you ardently disagree with the points that I'm going to be making and the reading that I'm going to be providing, or you agree. Um, I definitely welcome anyone who's willing to come up uh, and offer a challenge. Uh, it's important to discuss this matter and to have respectful dialogue, even among those who disagree. So I'm hoping that that can be accomplished tonight with the live stream. So let me take a moment to update some links here and get things going so people uh, can know where to go to join the live stream and to chat and come on. So give me a moment to take care of that. One moment, folks. Hey, Shalom, Flatlass and Trey and Avery. Good to see you all on here tonight. Let me adjust this. I'm going to take this over here. All right. I think that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get going here without further delay. All right. So hopefully you all can see the presentation there. Let me know in the chat if you can see that all right. If you need to make it bigger, or I think it should be good to go. So, like I said, the title for this presentation is Psalm 102, primarily verses 25 through 27, reapplied to the Son in Hebrews 1:10 through 12. And this is going to be a textual and contextual reassessment of Hebrews 1:2 through 13. So the question, does the author of Hebrews place Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27 on the lips of the Father speaking to the Son, or is the discourse structure functioning differently than traditionally assumed? First off, the reason for the question is because primarily among Trinitarians, but it's also largely assumed within the larger Unitarian camp, biblical Unitarian camp of Christianity, that when the author of Hebrews in verse 10 quotes Psalm 102 and saying, "And you, Lord, laid in the beginning, laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands." Um, it's commonly assumed that this is the author of Hebrews taking an Old Testament text, putting it on the lips of the Father, and speaking it to the Son. And the one of the main goals of this presentation is going to be to challenge that assumption and that reading. Now, this question is based upon something in verse 10, and so there's 9 other verses before that in Hebrews that are read a certain way in order to build up and to arrive at this sort of conclusion. And I just want to say up front that uh, the very idea that the author of Hebrews would be taking in an Old Testament quotation from a psalm where the Father is not even speaking, putting it on the lips of the Father and declaring, in order to declare that Jesus is Yod He Vav He, the Lord who laid the foundations of the earth and heaven, whose uh, hands are the works of the heavens. Um, uh, I think we just need to take a moment and consider, before I even begin the presentation, and I think this will become clear as we move through it, that uh, that's I just want to put it bluntly, that is a ridiculous assertion on its face, that the author of Hebrews would be knowingly distorting a text like that. And well, in scholarship, there's this sort of idea that the apostles just kind of willy-nilly do this prosopological exegesis. Um, that stems from the term prosopon, which is to um, to speak from a certain vantage point. And so it's sort of like taking Old Testament passages and just reworking them for the apostles' own particular argumentative needs, and sort of ignoring completely the original context, and they just sort of have the spiritual authority or inspiration under the guidance of the Spirit to be doing this sort of stuff with the Old Testament text. Um, this presentation will challenge that fundamental assumption that is being read, that directs the approach people take when they read Hebrews 1. So that's the fundamental question. Does the author of Hebrews actually do that? Place this psalm on the lips of the Father speaking to the Son? Pros no pons when it meets us, more like it. That's funny. Um, but the presentation that I will be giving is or the question that I will be driving at is the discourse structure in Hebrews 1 actually functioning differently than traditionally assumed? Um, so that's what I will be actually doing. And what I mean by discourse structure is there are especially in a stylized writing like Hebrews, which is really structured like a homily or sermon. It doesn't open like an epistolary letter like First Timothy, Second Timothy, James, uh, the 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 letters throughout the New Testament. Uh, this doesn't have an opening like a site, like an opening, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ by the authority of God, and to the churches of yada yada yada. There is no opening. It's just God at sundry times in various ways and occasions spoke to us through the prophets. But now in these last times, these last days, He has spoken to us by a Son. It just goes right into it. So this looks more like uh, a uh, a sermon, and it has to be said at the outset. Well, I'll get to that. But back to the discourse structure. Uh, a writing like this uses discourse markers like gar, day, um, and again, therefore. I mean, those are basic ones. It's not just relegated to Hebrews, but a discourse marker are these particles, these articles, conjunctions, and combinations that, uh, when spoken, the reader, the hearer, the listener would understand. Oh, this is a disjunctive. He's creating an adversative clause here that sets it against what was said before, or a um, an additive, an addition. Oh, here he's wrapping up his point. Oh, now he's transitioning to something else. Therefore, or now. Um, those are discourse markers, and Hebrews 1 is full of them. And we had to pay attention to those because they form a structure that helps the argument move along. And if we misread those discourse markers or put a different structure onto it, we start to make wrong assumptions about what the author is actually doing. And I think that's what's been going on for a while, for a long time with Hebrews 1. Let's see, make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, I agree. Um, I I know you got a lot of stuff going on, Trey, with um with life, and that so the theology experience, at least in terms of episodes and stuff, has been on the back burner. But I agree with Flatless. I hope and I pray that you're able to jump back into that before too long, because I know that's heavy on your heart and something you're passionate about. All right. So um I'm going to lay out three arguments. Hebrews 1 does not present the Son as the creator in verse 2. Hebrews 1 does not present the Father speaking anywhere in verses 6 through 12. And Hebrews 1 does not present the Son as the subject of you, Lord, or you, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, in verses 10 through 12. So those are the three arguments, and we're going to move through those right away. So let's talk about the structural overview of Hebrews 1 through 13. Now I sort of left out verse 14. I mean, there is 14 verses in chapter 1, but verse 14 simply says, are they not ministering spirits sent to serve those who will obtain salvation, or inherit eternal life or salvation? It's sort of uh, a wrap up statement. But in terms of 1 through 13, we have a prologue that basically sets up the themes that are going to be woven throughout the rest of uh, the sermon. And the main point of that is that the Son is the heir. The Son is given a name more excellent than that of angels, is heir of all things, uh, yada, yada, yada. And so that's sort of the long ago, at many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, or a Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through whom also he created the world. um, we'll get to that. Here, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here, make that a little bigger so people can see. Yeah, we'll talk about the reading of the world there when we get to that part. But all this, but we're talking about the Son and being an inheritor, being an heir of all things. And then uh the Son, is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his person. I'm going to say person. Nature is not the right word there, because the Greek is hypostasis, uh, which in Trinitarian world, that word is supposed to be person. Um, yeah, Brandon. Yeah. Just wait till I get to Aeonian world when we get to verse 2 in the analysis. But we're talking about the prologue here. So the exact imprint of his person, of his being. This is, I think, is just a shout out to wisdom literature, Jewish wisdom literature. The very same thing, much the same thing, with the same verbiage and ideas, um uh are said are ascribed to wisdom, um the God's own wisdom as an attribute of God, in places like Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach. Um, and he upholds the universe. Again, we'll talk about stuff like that, by the word of his power. That there is no word for universe there in the Greek text. It's just tapanta, the whole, the all things. Um, but we'll talk about how how the adjective tapanta is is just saying the whole of the things that we're talking about. It's not literally everything that exists. It never tapanta never means that in anywhere in the Bible or in Greek literature. It's always context dependent and limited to what's being spoken of, and it's just simply to say that the whole of what we're talking about. I think it's talking about the whole of the ages, the redemptive purposes, history. Um, that's what the Son is upholding. So after making purification for sins, uh, so uh, this is everything here in this prologue is about an exalted human Messiah that God has raised from the dead and has now exalted to the highest place, obviously below him. Um, Top hunts. Good one, Brandon. Yeah. Great good autocorrect there. Um so and he upholds okay, let me not miss my train of thought here. So this is all everything here is being spoken of an exalted human Messiah. This is the Messiah. He's at the right hand of the Father. And so everything in this prologue here is about what the Son is now receiving because he's at the right hand of the Father. After making purifications for sins, he did this when he entered into the holy place. That's talked about in Hebrews 9 and 10. He made purification for sins when he ascended and entered into through the veil um, uh, of the heavenly sanctuary there to present himself before God. Um, Therefore, to make purifications and basically minister as high priest and intercessor. He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having having become as much superior to angels as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. So right off the bat, the prologue is setting up a a person who has become more superior to angels, that has become superior to angels, preeminent, um, has a role and a function and a position that is higher than anything that God had promised to any angels. So going forward, the rest of the argument has to be establishing that the Son has become superior to the angels because we have a discourse marker at the beginning of verse 5 for that's the gar, that's the um yeah, that's in Greek it's gar, for to which of the angels did God ever say. So this moves us out of the prologue and into the meat of the author's argument. He's going to be arguing for the superiority of the Son. He's not going to be arguing for the ontology of the Son. When we're talking about Christology, we're talking about the theology about the Son, and the argument that the author is. I had to hammer this home again and again and again. The purpose of this argument is to establish that the Son is indeed superior, has become superior to the angels. Um, so let's go back to our. Let's go back to there. Okay. Boop. All right. So we moved out of the prologue now into the second part. I just put this verse 5a because this begins an inclusio, and I'll talk about that. To which of the angels did God ever say? Um, Notice in verse 13 that same rhetorical question is repeated. To which of the angels did God ever say? Now in verse 5, it's did God ever say, "You are my son; today I have begotten you"? In verse 13, it's to which of the angels did God ever say, "Sit at my right hand"? Um, and that uh, that includes you in those two phrases sort of encapsulate the movement of the argument. That's sort of how an inclusio works. Now, the common assumption that is read into this inclusio is that, well, this is supposed to be signaling that everything in between verses 5a and 13 are speech from the Father. No, that's not how an inclusio works. The rhetorical question is repeated to establish that this is a self-contained argument. So what we have here is, but to which of the angels did he ever say? That's the inclusio. That verse 5a opens that, and then verse 5b through verse 9 establishes an argument. The son's role versus the angel's role. And the author is going to be bringing forth a multitude of witnesses from the Old Testament scriptures that describe the son's role and the angel's roles and kind of contrast them. After those two, there's roughly two pairs of contrastive or two groups of contrastive statements that contrast the son to angels in that section. When we get to verse 10 through 12, we have an additional data point that the author employs into his argument from Psalm 102, and that's the understanding of God remaining and his reign remaining, his throne remaining, even when the present heavens and the earth are rolled up like a scroll. Followed by the closing of the inclusio with the rhetorical, to which of the angels? But to which of the angels did God ever say, sit at my right hand? Key observation here. This rhetorical question, introduced in verse 5 and repeated in verse 13, encloses this section as a focused argument that elevates the Son above the angels through the redemptive ages, aeonians. The author introduces citations as witnesses to this elevation. The discourse markings do not reapply the original text to different speakers. That's a key point. So here we go. Move on. Let's see. Yep. So the structural overview of Hebrews 1 through 13 zoomed in. We're going to zoom in now. Verses 5 through 9 form two contrastive pairs contrasting the function, role, and importance of the Son and the angels. The reason why I say two contrastive pairs is because verses 5 through 6 have this sort of for to which do the angels, and yet to the Son, or I'm sorry, for which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son? So God is saying something to the Son. However, when he speaks to angels, when the witnesses speak of angels, the author quotes from Deuteronomy 32:43 and Psalm 104:4. And that's in order to contrast what the role of angels are with the promise that's given to the Son. And that's verses 5 and 6. For did God ever say, for to which, or I'm sorry, let me go back to, yeah. But to which of the angels to which of the angels did God ever say? And then he quotes Psalm 2:7 and 2 Samuel 7:14, highlighting that he never made any angel his son, because obviously these are quotations directly from the scriptures, and this is actually God's speech. Because why do we know that? Well, look, the two quotations, you are my son, today I have begotten you. That's Psalm 2:7. We know God is speaking because it's first person pronouns. um, um, and again, so this is a discourse marker. And again, it's not just and, it, I think it's actually Kai Palin. Yeah, Kai Palin. Uh, the adverb is added, Palin, again. This is to show that what follows is a continuation of quotations by the Father. And that's important because this doesn't appear throughout the rest of the discourse, like as if it's and again and again and again. Um, it, this is these two, you are my son, today I've begotten you. And then 2 Samuel 7:14, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son, are grouped together. And he says, and again, um, yeah, so I don't want to lose my train of thought here. I'm trying to keep my eyes on a lot of things here. Um, but yeah, so this discourse marker indicates to the listener that the author is indeed grouping these two together, and it's reasonable to do for the author to do so because these are both blatantly, clearly God making declarations to the Son. Now, we know from both these passages that these are to Davidic kings, to David or to Solomon. That's particularly this one, 2 Samuel 7:14. This is spoken to David, and it's declaring to him, your son Solomon, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. So originally Solomon, and he's spoken to Davidic kings. Well, Messiah is a Davidic king. So it's natural, it's reasonable for the author of Hebrews to typologically, they are a type of Messiah. They were Messiah, they're anointed ones, just as Jesus is. So it's clearly this isn't like super duper deep mystical reorienting for a Jew to hear this. No, that Jesus is the Messiah. So the things declared about the Messiah, the King of Israel, are things that pertain to Jesus. He's in continuation with all that has come before, in terms of the Messiah. So that's what I mean by discourse markers. Yet, or however, he says, um, couple couple points to make here now. So the English has and again here, but that's not actually accurate because we don't have Kai Palin. We have, let's zoom in on the Greek here. We have de Palin. Um, and de is a different particle than a Kai. And that's important. Let's go back. Um, this is more of a adversative. God has said to the Son, today I begotten you, and I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Yet, again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, then there's he says, the Greek verb is lege. It's third person singular. It doesn't have a gender. Um, it can be he says, or it can be it says. But in discourse, the he says signals a particular speaker. What's normally assumed is that he says through all of this, whenever it has a he says, and then in verse 8, he says is just flat out added by many English translations. They just add he says in verse 8. There is no he says, there is no lege in verse 8. But that's important. We can't just flippantly just add discourse markers into the text to suit us. We can't do that. We have to be a little more careful with the text. There is a it's really it or he. It could be it or it could be he says here, and it actually is here. But that as a discourse marker, this is added when the following is going to be spoken by something other than who was speaking before. I want to make this clear. God is saying here, it's a rhetorical question. Did he say any of this to angels? The answer is no, but he did say to the Son, I have begotten you, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. Notice it's all first person pronouns. I, me, yada, yada. But in verse 6, he quotes, the author quotes Deuteronomy 32:43. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know, chat, let me know in the chat, who is the author, who is the speaker of Deuteronomy 32:43? Anybody know off the top of their head? Let me know in the chat. Yep, you're right, Trey. It's Moses. This is part of the Song of Moses. Yeah, yeah, it's Moses. Um and notice here, who is the firstborn in Deuteronomy 32:43? It we had to go back to Exodus and a few other places to really get this. That God is actually so I'll just come around and say that in Deuteronomy 32, that in the context the firstborn is Israel. God has brought Israel, his firstborn, into the world. Is um and who is the representative Israelite? Who represents Israel? Well, the king of Israel. So this is as much an application to Israel as a nation, as a people, as it is to her Messiah. Oh, what's going on here in the chat? Hmm. Prophet Muhammad in Bible Isaiah 42. Not exactly sure what you're getting at there. I mean, I'm interested to if you could elaborate beyond saying stringing a bunch of uh, phrases together in passages. I'd be interested to what that's all about. But anyways, moving on. Um, yeah, so this is talking about God bringing Israel into the world. Now, again, we're not talking about metaphysics. Bringing into the world is simply to Israel is coming onto the scene. I mean, remember, folks, Israel has wandered in the wilderness for a while. They've been tested. The generation that rebelled, they've passed away, and now God's getting ready to bring Israel into the world in across the Jordan. Um, and Moses in a declarative and an imperative sort of said, let all God's angels worship him. Now, this is interesting. There's a couple of options here. One is the hymn might be referring to the firstborn, but the, people like to harp on this rule, this rule in Greek that the nearest antecedent to a pronoun, the nearest proper noun, must be the antecedent of a pronoun. In this case, uh, it would be the idea is that it's referring to the firstborn, and you know we could go that way. I mean that's fine. I mean God is obviously exalting his firstborn, the nation of Israel, as chief among all the nations. And we know that angels are ministers. He goes on to quote Psalm 104. And so, of course, yeah, they would be serving Israel. And in fact, when we go all the way to 14, are they not all angels? Are they not all ministering spirits sent to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? So I mean that fits. But again, from the quote, the nearest antecedent in the actual from the actual verse, Deuteronomy 32:43, is God. So um uh, so I just think it's more straightforward to say that let all God's angels worship him, God. Um, but again, we could go either way. um, yeah, you're right. I said it, worshiping Israel. Um, no, I mean, obviously the word is to proskuneo, to give honor, reverence, blessing, praise, um, and uh, God is not uniquely the recipient of proskuneo. And the ESV doesn't even put a discourse marker there. Um, but if we go to verse 7, how does he introduce the quotation of Psalm 104:4? And indeed. So this is another way of putting and indeed or and furthermore. This is another way of saying and again. So we're talking about, let's go back. We're talking about what is said regarding angels. Here we go. He says he says, here's another discourse marker, marking indicating a shift in who's speaking. Why? Because again, Deuteronomy 32:43 is Moses speaking. Well, who's speaking in Psalm 104:4? Is that Moses? No, that's the psalmist. He makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. Um, we have to stop and make a clear point here. It it's just utterly ridiculous to think that this is God's speech. It's utterly ridiculous. God speaking of himself in the second person in the third person. He makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. Think about how ridiculous that would be on God's own lips. It's his angels. So if this is God's speech, you would say, I make my angels winds and my ministers a flame of fire. That's how God would say this. And that's what the author of Hebrews would have to do in order to revoice, do his prosopological exegesis, um, as the scholars love to put it. No, the author is not revoicing this quotation and putting it on God's lips. God's not saying this to angels. No, it says, the scripture says, the psalmist says, God, Moses, psalmist. But of the Son. So we had Kai, we had and indeed of the angels, it says, the psalmist says, but oh, I went the wrong way. Oh, there we go. uh yeah. So we have a discourse marker here. It's the adversative day. However, but so so now we're signaling something instead of angels. Now he's going to give give a witness about what's concerning the Son. And there is no it, he says. Let's go back to that. Unto, however, the Son. He says, nope, nope, no, there's no he says. Why is there no he says? Is it just because it's redundant? Is it because the Hebrews author, well, I don't want to keep saying he says. No, there's a reason why there's no discourse shift marker there. The reason being is because it's still a psalmist. The psalmist 104:4, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. And the psalmist, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Um, I yeah. Again, I'm perfectly okay with the rendering uh from Psalm 45 verse 6, your throne, O God, and they also being used in evocative sense, even though it's in a predicative position. Um, uh, I'm fine with. I think everyone should be okay with the Davidic king being called God, because rulers are called God, judges are called gods. That's not beyond the pale. That's not scandalous. And it shouldn't be if we know our lexical data. But again, there's a lot of data to show that this is actually in Psalm 45 that the writer, the psalmist, is saying, uh, your throne is divine. God is your throne. Um, and it endures forever and ever. I mean, and the precedent for this again is places like Second Chronicles, where is it? Yeah, Second Chronicles 29:20 and 23:24, around there, where it literally says that Solomon sat on the throne of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So if you have a Davidic king sitting on the Lord's throne, and the Lord's throne is forever and ever, that means he he's the intention is that his reign would never end. Um, God will establish his kingdom forever. Um, and I think it does lend credence to this theos being a predicate nominative. Um, your throne is divine. Um, that's fine, because that becomes important when we get to verse 10 and where the author goes with that. But let's continue again. Um, you have loved righteousness and hated wickedness, you being the Davidic king. Therefore, God, your God, and there's no way around this. The First off, Psalm 45, verse 6 and 7 is a song to a Davidic king, a human king, and is his enthronement psalm. It's a song on the occasion of him being enthroned, seated on high. And that's why it says, God, your God, has anointed you. So God doesn't anoint God. God doesn't anoint himself. And the Davidic king certainly doesn't anoint himself. And Jesus doesn't anoint himself. God anoints the Davidic king. Has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions or above your companions. God doesn't have companions. So again, this is appropriate. It's a Davidic king that this psalm is being declared to. Jesus is the Davidic king, ergo, this fits. There's no gerrymandering going on. There's no deep theological, metaphysical, spirit-inspired, uh, um, weird mystical thing going on here where he's shifting speakers. This isn't the Father speaking. This is the psalmist speaking, and it's the same. It's the same uh speaker referent. It's a psalmist. So, but of the Son, the psalmist says that. Then we have the soul, the single on its own chi, the conjunctive chi. This is a discourse marker. Um, let's see. Yeah. This goes along well with Avery says, this goes along well with John 20:17. God, Yeshua's God has anointed him. Yes. Yep. Yep. I go to my God, my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Yep. So let's jump. Let me see if I, so we've covered the two pairs. We've just gotten done with the quotation of Psalm 45. The second pair was verses 7 through 9. For about the angels, it, or he says, Psalm 104:4, highlighting inferior role of angels. They're ministering spirits, flames of fire. But, however, about the Son, and then quotes Psalm 45:6 through 7, highlighting exaltation of Son to sit on the throne. So now we get to verses 10 through 13. The structure of this is now we have the enduring reign of God into the age to come, plus the Son, not angels, sitting at his right hand. That's argued for from verses 5 through 9. So we have this witness about the enduring reign of God, and then we add what the author has said before about the Son sitting at his right hand, equals the Son being administrator and inheritor of the redemptive age to come, not angels. Okay, key observation. This rhetorical question, introduced in verse 5 and repeated in verse 13, encloses this section as a focused argument that it elevates the Son above the angels through the redemptive ages. The author introduces citations as witnesses to this elevation. The discourse markings do not reapply the original text to different speakers. The author uses the third person lege to simply introduce the speech cited in the quotation, not identify every speech as actually God speaking. Checking in the chat here. All right, moving on. So now let's move into argument 1. Hebrews 1:2 does not present Jesus as creator. So the text we have in Hebrews 1:2, that's the through whom he made the world. Um, the Greek term is through whom he has uh, um, the Greek term is or the verb there is often rendered as made. Some translations even say created. This is not the verb for created. This is the verb that's predominantly used in reference to taking something that already exists and then fashioning it or molding it towards a certain purpose. And then we have aeonian, the plural of aeon, which we need to note the object is aeonian, times, ages, not cosmon, world or cosmos. In the LXX, the use of aeonian, overwhelmingly denotes durations of time, not physical elements. The author of Hebrews does use cosmon elsewhere in Hebrews 4:3, 9:26, 10:5, and 11:7. That's critical. That there is a word in Greek that the author has available to use if he wants to denote the physical creation or the physical world or inhabited space, things like that. The author doesn't use that here. He uses a word that in the LXX overwhelmingly denotes durations of time, is rendered often from the Hebrew olam. So the implication here is that if physical creation were intended, cosmos was available. The choice of aeonian is deliberate and meaningful for the discussion of Hebrews 1 through 2 concerning current and future ages. See 6:5, for instance, where again speaking about the consummation of the ages. The meaning of aeonian. In the LXX and Second Temple usage, aeon frequently refers to ages, epochs, redemptive periods, and temporal administrations. It does not normally denote the material universe. And aeonian is plural, so it would be very odd for the author to refer to creating the worlds. If we're to go with world, we're going to have to say worlds. I mean, there's no sense in which a plural noun like aeonian, if it meant worlds or anything physical, would just be rendered in singular world. There's no sense. And again, it's just odd to be translating it as worlds. Additionally, the aorist indicative verb apoisin is predominantly used to denote the arranging, fashioning of things which already exist, not the creation of things by which they are brought into existence. Therefore, Hebrews 1:2 likely means through whom he, God, ordered or structured the ages. This fits redemptive historical orchestration, not Genesis creation. And we have contextual support from Hebrews itself. Within Hebrews, the theme is eschatological structuring, not material creation mechanics. We have 1:2, which we're talking about, and we're going with ages, because I think that makes the most sense. We have 6:5, powers of the coming age, not powers of the coming universe. In 9 verse 26, we have talks about the consummation of the ages, not the end of the universe. And in 11:3, we have ages framed at God's command, not the world was created. Conclusion, verse 2 does not establish the Son as creator of the physical universe. So this is just before we go running off to be highly selective in the lexical data about what aeonian can mean, we should, as a first order step, see how the same author uses it throughout the same book, if possible. And if he doesn't use it anywhere else in that letter or that book, we should see where he uses it elsewhere. Well, in this case, we have ample instances of this word being used throughout the book of Hebrews, and it's used seemingly univocally in these three other occurrences: 6:5, 9:26, 11:3. So we should, common sense would dictate that that's the same in 1 verse 2. Again, I had to stress that even in verse 11, later on in verse 7, the author uses cosmon to refer to the physical world. He could have used that here if he wanted to. I mean, he should have really. He could have even used the related noun oikomenon that he uses in chapter 2. But he doesn't use either cosmon or oikomenon here in 11:3. Common objections to reading aeonian as ages. First one in Colossians, this comes from I read this recently from David Wilbur, who is a Trinitarian, and he argued in his article, and I offered pushback even from my video to push back on his claim about this, and he ignored it. He didn't even he didn't even take the time to watch the video, and so he might not be open to any pushback on this view. But anyways, in Colossians 1:16 through 20, which shares parallel themes with Hebrews 1:1 through 4, physical things in heaven and on earth, such as thrones and dominions and rulers and authorities, are said to have been created in him, created in the Son, and that in him all these hold together. So shouldn't that inform what aeonian and tapanta, all things, are meaning here in Hebrews 1:1 through 4? Here's my answer. In both cases, in both Colossians 1:16 through 20 and in Hebrews 1:1 through 4, the verbs are passive with respect to the Son. This is important. Compare Colossians 1:16, which says, in him were created, with Hebrews 1:2, through whom he, God, made the ages. In both cases, God is the active subject, with the Son being the passive instrument. Fundamentally, the Son is not acting, is not doing the fashioning or the making or the creating. It's the Father, it's God who's doing things. And so that becomes clear. You read Colossians 1:16, 17, 18. They're all passive with respect. The verbs are passive. In him were all things created, things in heaven or on earth, whether they be thrones, powers, principalities, authorities. All these were created through and for him, not that nowhere in those passages does the author ever say the Son created all the heavens and the earth, or the Son created the thrones, power. No, God is doing the fashioning, the orchestrating, and he's doing so through the Son as the embodiment of God's wisdom, the command, the word, by which God created and does creative acts. B, the focus of Colossians 1:15 through 20 is the Son's preeminence as the firstborn from the dead, not declaring preexistence. He is above all, pro panton, the rulers and authorities and dominions. God has placed him there. And that's a critical point. I mean, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but many translations say he is before all things, pro panton, and rendering that as before all. But the exact same phrase is spoken both by Peter and James, and their unanimous English translations say above all, not before all, as in time. You could say before all, but again, the controlling focus, that the paradigm is preeminence. That is the Son's preeminence above all things, not the Son's temporal existing before any of these things. Preeminence, preeminence. So God has placed him there. And then C, the adjective tapanta never means literally all things, but is denoting the whole of that which is being discussed. In Colossians 1:15 through 20, what is being discussed are things, certain things in heaven and on earth. And then whether they be, that is a discourse marker to indicate that that all the things that he's actually talking about are not the physical universe. He's talking about principalities, powers, thrones, rulers, that sort of thing. Those things are being organized and positioned and administrated in the Son. That's literally what's going on, because he's being placed above above all those things. Uh, he is the head. God is making him the head. And then in Hebrews 1:1 through 4, the all things is talking about ages. That's pretty much what it's talking about. In Hebrews, so the second objection is in Hebrews 11:3, the author uses aeonian, but there it's talking about coming into being. It uses the verb genomai, of what can be seen. Is this not talking about the universe, of things coming into existence? Well, no, not necessarily. The verb genomai can just as easily refer to bringing to pass, happening. It has quite a large, wide semantic range of use. And I think it's actually just that by God's command, uh, things come to pass. Um, okay. Moving on to argument 2. The Father is not speaking in verses 6 through 12. And this hopefully was clear when I went through the discourse markers in verses 6 through 9 and into 10, to show that the author is not revoicing those passages. He's eliciting them as witnesses and just saying in various places it says or he says, and literally it's Moses talking, it's the psalmist talking. God is not talking. The only place God says things is the first person pronoun passages like Psalm 2 and 2 Samuel 7:14, where God literally is speaking. The other times God is not speaking. Those aren't God's words. Um, so traditional reading assumes God is speaking to the Son. But note carefully, the text never says the Father says to the Son anywhere in 6 through 12. The quotations are introduced rhetorically. The grammatical flow does not shift into a dramatized dialogue. So this is quite long, but this bears, I should read all this. The author is presenting scripture as testimony, not narrating an intra-Trinitarian conversation. This is common sense. It's just common sense that there is no intra-divine person conversation going on. That's not at all how the discourse flows. The traditional reading misreads the discourse markers and how they function in the logic of the argument. The author consistently, throughout the whole letter, chains quotations together by the use of and again when he wants to show it's all the same speaker. The author also consistently uses it, he says, to introduce a different speaker. This explains why Deuteronomy 32:43 is introduced with it, he says, in verse 6, because the speaker has shifted from things God said in verse 5 to something Moses said. This explains why Psalm 104:4 is introduced with it, he says, in verse 7, because the speaker has shifted from Moses to the psalmist. This explains why the quotation of Psalm 45, 6 through 7 is not introduced with it, he says, in verse 8, because the speaker has not changed. It's still from the Psalms. And finally, this explains why verse 10 has neither and again, nor it, he says, nor about the Son. It just has Kai. This is a clear marker of a discourse shift, whereas the author everywhere else uses and again to continue the same subject and speaker. Let me give you an example of this, of what I mean by consistently. So let's go to Hebrews 2. We have 3 back to back to back quotations from the Old Testament. And only once is the verb saying, and a variant of lege, it only introduces the first quotation. Why? Because the same speaker is on all 3. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, him being the Son. He's not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, so we're still putting something on the lips of Jesus. And it's appropriate because this is the psalmist. I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. So all 3 of these quotations are being voiced on the by the same typological figure, of which Jesus is the antitype of that. So they all fit him, and it's he says, because we're introducing a speaker, and again, same speaker, and again, same speaker. To sweep aside the objection of that in Hebrews 1:10 that it doesn't say again or to the Son because that would be redundant. We can sweep aside that objection because he has no qualms with being redundant here. The author says and again and again. Why? Because these are discourse markers. These are important. They're not superfluous. They're not redundant. They serve a purpose to indicate to the hearer who's hearing this read aloud that the author intends all of these to be chained together, to be voiced by the same individual and about the same thing. You can't level the objection of redundancy as an explanation for why verse 10 in chapter 1 just has Kai. And then again, let's see, I'm trying to find another. Yeah. In chapter 4, for we who have believed enter that rest, as he has said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. And again in this passage, in the word again, he appoints today's saying. So again, these are discourse markers, and the author is pretty consistent with their use. All right. Oh, let's see. Did I just miss something? Okay. So the rhetorical flow and logic. The structure is verse 5a, to which of the angels did he ever say, opens the inclusio. Verses 5b through 9, 2 groups of contrastive citations from scripture showing the superior function of the Son over the angels. Verses 10 through 12, an additional witness, Kai, could be rendered as now, from a psalm about God's enduring reign even into the age to come. Leading into verse 4, or verses 13 through 14, to which of the angels did he ever say, closes the inclusio. If God has said to the Son, sit at my right hand, and if his reign is into the age administration to come, then the Son, not angels, is the heir of God's rule. Now, why is this a critical argument? Let's zoom out a bit. On the occasion of the writing of this sermon, this is a sermon. Hebrews is written to persecuted believers who, in many respects, are being cut off not only from their possessions, their property is being confiscated. The author of Hebrews alludes to things like this in chapter 10, with the exhortation for them to not shrink back, even though they're facing the confiscation of their property and yada 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 yada. So these are persecuted Christians. They're being persecuted both by Greeks, and they're being persecuted by they're being cut off from participation in the temple, and that's hugely important. I mean, their life, their worship centers around the temple. Yes, even post resurrection, post ascension, their worship and their lives continued to revolve around the temple, offering sacrifices, going to the times of prayer, meeting in the temple precinct. Um, and they are being cut off from access to that. And so this argument is that, well, even when you find yourselves cut off from the rituals and the practices and the worship and the system that is governed during this age, which was mediated by angels, we have a better mediator in the age to come. We don't want to shrink back because uh, there's an age coming, and even when this age is wrapped up and the heavens and the earth are rolled up like a scroll per se, uh, the age to come, we have a greater priesthood, we have a greater uh, covenant, we have greater promises in store for us. We'd have to hold true to Messiah. And he is even now sitting at the right hand of God. He's made superior to angels, so that we know that it's sort of the, if we die with him, we will reign with him. It's sort of that idea. So that's why bringing in Psalm 102 at this point in the argument, after establishing the superiority of the Son over angels, is to now bring that reality into the age to come. When the present heavens and the earth are rolled up like a scroll, God remains even when they pass away. And if his reign is into the age of administration to come, and the Son is sitting on the throne of God, then the Son, not angels, is the heir of God's rule. So they are not framed as a continuous speech of the Father addressed to the Son. The author is arguing from Scripture, not scripting divine speech. Final argument. Psalm 102, 25, 27 is not addressed to the Son. Now, this gets a little complicated, but let's work through this. How are we doing on the chat? Uh, okay, there we go. So the moment we've all been waiting for. Psalm 102. So in the Masoretic text in the Hebrew scriptures, it's Psalm 102, and the LXX it's Psalm 101. That's why this is kind of all in parentheses here. Might be a little confusing, but So Psalm 102 in both the Masoretic text and the LXX is a lament of the afflicted servant, and a plea for Zion's restoration. This is an afflicted servant. The psalmist is speaking in the spirit of an afflicted servant and pleading to God for Zion's restoration. It's addressed to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and it's a contrast between mortal frailty and God's enduring permanence. It is not originally a father to son dialogue. So the narrative detail that is pertinent to this discussion, the reason why, part of the reason why this gets confused and assumed that the author of Hebrews is doing something interesting with this passage is the fact that verse 23 in the LXX version contains he answered him. And let me pull that up. So in the in the Hebrew text, uh, there's no indication of a speaker change or something happening. Yeah, um he's pleading to God, let this be recorded for a generation to come, so that a people yet to be created may praise the Lord. That he looked down from his holy height, from heaven the Lord looked at the earth. He has broken my strength in mid-course. He has shortened my days. Oh my God, I say, take me not away in the midst of my days, you whose years endure throughout all generations. Of old you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. So it's obvious from the Hebrew text that the author is lamenting of his afflicted position, his situation, and recognizing that it's even partly due to God himself bringing him to this place. He has broken my strength in mid-course. He has shortened my days. I say, oh my God. Now this is the servant now turning and directly addressing God. Take me not away in the midst of my days. You get the sense, and this happens a lot in the Psalms, the imprecatory, kind of the lamenting Psalms. The psalmist is indicating that he's near death, that his bones are wasting away, and he's surrounded by affliction. um his tears are his pillow, and yada yada yada. um and so he's saying, Lord, don't abandon me, take me not away in the midst of my days, don't let me be cut off, in other words, you whose years endured throughout all generations. You laid the foundations of the earth, you remain, Lord. So it's an appeal to God's permanence and um his steadfastness through all generations, um, that the servant would be saved and that Zion would be restored. So that's pretty clear. It's pretty clear cut and straightforward. What happens at verse 23, though, when we go to the um, LXX, and we could go to like Brenton Septuagint translation here. Instead of saying, um, instead of the servant saying to God, cut me not a, um, cut me not off in the midst of my days, the LXX says something like, he answered him, apokrythe auto, in the way of his strength. Tell me the fewness of my days. And then if we continue on to the next verse, reading that same translation, take me not away in the midst of my days, thy years are through all generations. what happens is this gets read like in the LXX because it's apocryphan auto, so it's a third person uh indicative, aorist indicative. It's read as in saying he answered him, and then it says take me not away in the midst of my days, or tell me the fewness of my days, and take me not away in the midst of my days. uh the weird thing is, and again, um I almost like uh I feel dumb to even think that this is what's happening, is that God has answered the servant, and now we're seeing God's speech here, where God is saying, tell me the fewness of my days, O servant. Tell me, take me not in the way in the midst of my days. Oh, so God is now petitioning the servant? I mean, think about this, people. And I recently um I listened to a video from a Unitarian apologist. And I use that term specifically. Um, but I'm not going to say who, but this is a Unitarian apologist. And he argues from a very fringe view put forth by F. Bruce, in his commentary on Hebrews on this passage, that we are actually hearing God's speech here. That after it says he answered him, we're now listening to God speaking to the servant or to another person here. And God is saying, tell me the fewness of my days. Take me not away. People, this is actually argued by not just a Trinitarian. This is argued by a biblical Unitarian, and he's an apologist, and he's confused. He's he doesn't know Greek. He doesn't know enough about Greek to, and he hasn't really searched this out. So he just read a commentary and says, "Oh well, this makes it okay that God is addressing the servant. God is now talking about the son and calling him Yod He Vav He." Um, it's utterly ridiculous. And I did go on a stream, not on his channel, but I did go on a stream and pushed back on this, and it very quickly devolved into ad hominems. He didn't like being pressed on this. I don't think he was used to that, and um, well, I uh, that it was very easy to challenge this type of idea. And let's jump back to the slide, and I'll tell you why. So this is narrative structure. The psalmist speaks, God answered. There is no speech marker after the apocryphe auto. A, a speech marker would be like leg, go, or apin, following the verb apocryphe. If verse 23 were meant to be God's own speech to the psalmist, then the Greek would have included a direct speech marker. This is something that he ignores. He that and that Trinitarians who put forth this weird argument, they ignore that apocryphe does mean he answered. But when the apocryphe is followed by actual speech from that person who is answering, there is a speech marker like Lego. And I mean, you could just do a quick search, Bible Hub. I mean, you could go to, do I want to, yeah, let's do this. So just look up, he answered and said. You could pull up like Matthew 13:37. And you go to some English translations will not include it, but if you go to literal translations like the Berean Literal Bible, and answering, that's apocryphe, he said. The one sowing the good seed is the Son of Man. Now this is the one answering here is Jesus, and he said, you always have a speech marker like this. And you go to the Greek, I'll show you. And answering, there's apokryphe. He said, there's your speech marker. It's Lego. This signals direct speech. It's a speech marker. You you don't have apokryphe by itself and then something following is direct speech. You never have apokryphe by itself in that case. It's always followed by a speech marker without exception. And I tried to point this out, but he was being really short with me. He didn't like the pushback, and it started to evolve into ad hominems. I was saying things I think this, and he's like, oh well, you just go to Oprah. I mean, why don't you go on Oprah and tell Oprah about this? And it's like, what are you doing? Don't do that. So it was so it was so strange. Um, but anyways, people who are apologists, who who endeavor to be apologists, this is what they do. They don't know what they're talking about, and when they get pushback, they get very disrespectful, and short with you. So it's unfortunate that that happens. But it needs to be said. The apocryphe in the LXX verse 23 is not followed by a speech marker. So there is no change of speaker from verse 23 to 24. It's narrative structure. The psalmist is acknowledging that God answered. And then he just continues on with his petition in light of the answer. He says, it's the psalmist saying, tell me the fewness of my days. Um, it's sort of similar to that other psalm where it says, teach me to order my days that I might have a right mind, or something that I'm kind of paraphrasing. It is not a divine speech directed toward a second divine person. Again, it's silly, it's nonsense. So the majority view in both Jewish and Christian exegesis of LXX Psalm 102, technically be Psalm 101, 24 through 27, is that the speaker does not change from the psalmist. The psalmist simply narrates that God answered him and proceeds to petition God in response. Sadly, even some non-Trinitarian and Unitarian apologists have sided with a fringe position put forth by F.F. Bruce, that the author of Hebrews read the LXX version and inferred from it that at verse 23, the speaker changes to God, addressing another Lord. Again, jump back for a moment and just read verse 23 in the LXX as if it's God speaking. God is petitioning to the servant, tell me the fewness of my days and cut me not off in the midst of my. I mean, it's it's utterly ridiculous. We should not even be entertaining that. It's dumb. It's ludicrous. Um, and again, this is a fringe position. Like F.F. Bruce argues this, and I think another one. He kind of uh takes his cues from another person named Bacon. Um, and his move is it's a hermeneutical one based off of the a priori assumption that Hebrews 1:10 is continuing divine speech directed to the Son. I already refuted that idea because of the discourse markers, that there is no discourse marker in verse 10 to indicate a continuation of speech, divine or otherwise, that's going to the Son. It doesn't say, and again, it doesn't say, and to the Son. It doesn't say, and he says. None of that. It's just Kai. Now. So this isn't an exegetical move that Bruce makes. This is a hermeneutical move based on an a priori assumption about what the author of Hebrews is doing in chapter 1. The LXX version, though awkward in its grammatical structure, should be read in a way that harmonizes with the Masoretic text, unless exegetical factors make that impossible. So we should take a conservative approach to the LXX, acknowledging that there is an additional he answered him inserted into the text, and that sort of makes it awkward. And in certain patristic sources and even different um I should say renderings of the Septuagint, like you could take a look at the Nets version of the Septuagint, and they try to harmonize a little bit better the LXX language with the Masoretic text, and instead of saying apokrythe auto, it's apokrythe mu. He answered me. Therefore, the speaker is still me, not not God suddenly now speaking to somebody else. Bruce bases his position entirely on the appearance of apokrythe auto. He answered him in the LXX, and reading laid the foundations of the earth in verse 25 in connection with Isaiah 51:16 to suggest that this other Lord is the one who will lay the foundations of the earth. First off, again, we discussed already that there is no speech marker following the verb apokrythe. If verse 23 meant to be God's own speech to the psalmist, then the Greek would have included a direct speech marker. The second point is the question, who is actually acting in Isaiah 51:16? So let's jump to Isaiah 51. Let's go to 16. And I, this is the Lord speaking, the Lord God, have put my words in your mouth. So your here is in reference to sort of this is one of the Isaiah's servant songs. So it could be debated whether this is talking about the nation of Israel as God's servant or this is an individual. It probably is an individual at this point. These servant songs have sort of morphed or progressed from the nation of Israel and maybe a remnant of Israel to more of an individual. So by the time we get to Psalm 53 or Isaiah 53, that is, that servant song, it's addressing an individual. While we could still roughly have in mind that the individual still is representing what Israel as a nation is meant to be at this point. So I have put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand, establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth. Yep. So it's the same Greek phrase about laying the foundations of the earth and saying to Zion, you are my people. In certain renderings, I'm going to see if I can highlight this. Um, so like the Berean Standard Bible, it reads, I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand to establish the heavens, to found the earth. It it almost reads this way as if God is doing these things so that the servant would establish the heavens, to found the earth, and to say to Zion, you are my people. Um, this is what F.F. Bruce does is he takes this passage, looks at the similar language, and then says, oh, this is another Lord who is establishing the heavens. God is putting the Lord is putting his words in the mouth of the Lord, another Lord to establish the heavens, to found the earth. When in fact, that's not what's happening here at all. Is I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand in order that I might establish the heavens, to found the earth and say to Zion, you are my people. God is the one that's acting. So when I ask the question, who is acting in Isaiah 51:16, it is Yahweh, the Lord, not the servant who will lay the foundations of the earth. And we could see verse 13. Let's back up to verse 13 in the same passage. And having forgotten the Lord your maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. Now, it's clear the maker, the Lord, is the one who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. Bruce appears to have just ignored, again, context and is grasping for something under the assumption, the a priori assumption, that the author of Hebrews has to be directing Psalm 102 to the Son, to be about the Son. So he's grasping anywhere he can find about the to squeeze something out of the text where it could be that this is a prophetic utterance about Jesus, about the servant laying the foundations of the earth. It's just not so, people. It doesn't work, and you need to trash that assumption if that's that a priori assumption of reading Hebrews 1 that way. If that's what you're doing, you need to throw that assumption in the trash. You're implicating you are implicating the author of Hebrews in a most egregious and utterly ridiculous eisegesis of the text if you're reading it that way. All right. So the conclusion of that is the author of Hebrews, quoting Psalm 102, does not automatically transform it into intra-divine dialogue. The Father, not another person, remains the one who laid the foundations of the earth, who fashioned the heavens, and he alone will be the one to roll them up like a scroll. The author of Hebrews is writing to persecuted believers. I said this earlier. Psalm 102, 25 through 27 functions in the structure of 1, 5 through 13 solely to encourage persecuted believers, just like the afflicted servant in Psalm 102 is encouraged, that this heavens and earth will pass away, but God remains. And therefore his Son, whom they have placed their hope in, who is at the right hand of God, will be the everlasting administrator and mediator for them, not angels. They would know the context of Psalm 102 as a petition to God on the part of afflicted servants. And that is the end of my presentation. All right. Let's stop sharing here. All right. Does anybody I'll go ahead and pin the link to join the Zoom meeting and discuss. You can come on and discuss. I'll pin that to the chat here. All right, so that's pinned to the top of the chat. Anyone here still watching at this point? If anyone disagrees with anything that I've said or wants some pushback or just wants to discuss this further, I'd be happy to invite you on. And let me know in the chat if you're listening what you thought so far. Ah, I see you, Trey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Am I live?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was very good. Very good, brother. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been piecing together things for a while just to get as much info um in there as I can.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I think the key thing that sticks out to me from your presentation and just considering Hebrews 1 myself is the importance of whenever a New Testament author quotes in so-called Old Testament text, we should always go back and ask ourselves what's going on in that text.
Mhm.
And two things stand out to me, and I tried to put this in the live chat, but two things stand out to me from the quotation of the directly relevant verses to the point of contention, which is verses 10 through 12. When you go and you look at that text, number one, it's a son speaking. And number two, he's speaking about his divine father. And who is that divine father? Oh, yeah, it's Yahweh.
Mhm.
So, exegetically speaking, even the Trinitarian has to grant that in the cited text in verses 10 through 12 of Hebrews chapter 1, it's about Yahweh the Father.
Mhm.
I just, even a Trinitarian has to grant that. So, however they want to kind of still justify the Jesus is Yahweh reading of that text, they have to grant those 2 points, it seems to me.
Right, yeah. There um there have been two uh I struggle to actually decide which is the worst approach among Trinitarians and even some Unitarians. Um it there's two approaches is they both agree that the author of Hebrews is reappropriating or appropriating Psalm 102 to be about the Son and calling the Son the Lord who laid the foundation of the earth. They just the, one group just bites the bullet and says that the author of Hebrews just flat out just ripped the text out of context and did whatever he wanted with it, like as if it was a new covenant, spiritually inspired, just new thing. um and they just bite the bullet on that's like that's it. he he just, I mean, he's an apostle, we have to take his word for it. That he had the revelation. He just, that's the revelation, and we all have to just accept that. And along with that, associated with that, we just had to accept all the other times that we think the apostles are just ripping Old Testament text out of context to do whatever they want with them. And it's fine, it's good. They knew what they were doing. We don't. Uh, uh, so that's one approach. The other approach is there's got to be some way, something hidden in the text that the author of Hebrews, that a Jew was like, oh yeah, I see it now. I see it, how Jesus is there. He was there in the original one. It really was about him. That's the two approaches, and it's like I struggle to think which one of those is worse. Which of
Mm.
those two is the more ludicrous? And I just I don't know.
Or the simplest explanation, which is that he's simply quoting a text in its context to make the
Mm.
point that was being made by the text.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I hope I've been able to demonstrate that uh persuasively to those hopefully I get to share to a broader audience. But and I definitely know I'm going to get some pushback on, the discourse structure of that, because that's a tough tradition to let go of. um it is this idea that whenever it says he says, it's obviously repeating that God is saying
Mm,
this, he's saying that, he's saying he
mm.
says this and he says that. um um yeah, it's just
Yeah, I have a thought about that. So, obviously in the first verse where the first quotation or citation is introduced, it says that God says. And so people traditionally interpret everything that follows there that introduces a citation to be God speaking. And I think your point is well taken that when we look at the context of these citations, we should understand that it's not necessarily God speaking. Because, for example, in the Deuteronomy 32 quotation, it's Moses speaking. In the Psalm 102 quotation, it's the psalmist speaking. But, in another sense, God is speaking in the sense that he's the one who has inspired these texts. And so I would say, even given that, there's no real problem here. So I don't want to like, what I want to say is simply that even if you suppose that ultimately God is speaking through these texts, there's still no problem.
Mhm.
But I think your point is well taken that when we actually look at the text, just to repeat myself, the person speaking is someone other than God. Again,
Mhm.
Deuteronomy 32, it's Moses. Psalm 102, it's the psalmist, whoever that is.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. 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 And the author of Hebrews obviously holds that all these passages that he's drawing from as witnesses are God's word, that they're authoritative about things that God has planned, has purposed, um and the one of the main hiccups, hangups that happens is again just on that conjunctive kai, introducing verse 10, and how that discourse marker is read. If you already interpret all the other discourse markers as just and God said, and but yet God said this to angels, and God said this to the Son, and he said this, and um when it gets to and um that's why I think it's important that we also survey how the same author uses discourse markers throughout the letter. That's why I showed examples, and if you just go through the rest of the letter, not every chapter has chains of quotations. Chapter 2 does, chapter 3 does, I think chapter 4 does, um, but 5 doesn't, and 6 doesn't, 7 um does, I think, but there are a number of those chains, and you just follow what he does and how he uses the discourse markers. You get a sense, oh, okay, uh, verse verse 10, the kai there is a shift. It's a shift from uh uh to it's a shift to a different subject, not the things said about angels or the Son, but about God. And I hope that I showed that. But yeah, and I'm not the only one, and you're not the only one who sees this. There's a biblical Unitarian, um, his name is OJ, um, or that's a brief, or I guess that's like a shortened version of his name. I haven't been able to, for the life of me, I couldn't pronounce his entire name, um, because he's African, and uh but he holds the same view that uh the reason why Psalm 102 is pertinent to the argument is not to say anything about the Son, but because it is a suffering servant motif. And that's the connection to Jesus is, and he puts it more starkly that um it's as if the author of Hebrews is um, putting the words of the suffering servant onto the mouth of Jesus, um, petitioning to the Father that he's the one who laid the foundation of the earth, just like the suffering servant in Psalm 102 is. Um, the only issue there is it's not a the suffering motif doesn't enter at all in chapter 1. It does in chapter 2, and then again in chapter 5, because in chapter 2 the author is making the point of having Jesus made like us in every way. You know, he is tempted like us in every way, and is went through the things that we go through, and that the present audience is indeed presently going through. And then in chapter 5, with where he went around in the flesh, with cries and and um and crying out to the one who could save him. So that's there, but it's just not really apparent that the author has the suffering of the Son in mind in chapter 1.
Yeah, fair enough. I think the most salient point for me is one you made towards the beginning of your presentation. And of course, you stated it very strongly when you said that it's ridiculous to consider that, you know, the author of Hebrews is saying in verses 10 through 12 that Yahweh is speaking to Yeshua in these verses. But when you go and actually look at Psalm 102, and again, I would encourage anyone who is watching this, when you read Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12 in particular, and you actually go and look at the Psalm 102, verses 25 and following, and you think to yourself, what's going on in this text? It really does reinforce the point that you're making. It's really absurd to think that the author of Hebrews is saying with that one little word, and, or in Greek kai, that his point here is, yeah, Yahweh was saying to Jesus the Son that he's the one who laid the foundation of the earth, and that's the point that the author of Hebrews is making by the citation. Because when you go read the text of Psalm 102, it's very clearly just like some servant / son of Yahweh praying to Yahweh. Like that's all that it is. So to think that that's the point that, again, the point that the author of Hebrews would be making with this text is, yeah, completely divorced from that context. Yahweh was like somehow speaking to Jesus. That he's the one who created. It really is just like a little wacky. It's like, why would you think that if
And
you just read the text of Psalm 102?
And that's why I made that thumbnail to be like so caricature-y, of the Ancient of Days, the Father sitting on the throne looking up at the exalted Jesus saying, "Oh Jesus, you're Yahweh." It's
Right.
like, it's just like, it's
That's
like I hope that connects with people. I mean, people will be offended by that, because uh they'll feel like I'm belittling their belief, and it's like, I kind of need to do that. I mean, you people need to
yeah.
wake up and realize how absurd you sound.
Mm. Especially from the crowd that table pounds about how obvious these texts are.
Mhm.
Because we run into this all the time, and it's like, don't you know how clear Hebrews 1 is about how Jesus is Yahweh? Look, you've got Yahweh saying to Yahweh, like, you created the foundation, or you laid the foundation of the earth.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, but he's citing something. Let's go look at what he cited. And when you go look at what he cited, that's just not what's going on in that text. So
Mhm.
again, you have to come down to what you said earlier, which is one approach is to say, okay, well, the author of Hebrews was just inspired by the Spirit to say something completely different than what was meant in the original context. But then the key question is, okay, that sounds post hoc. That sounds made up, because why should I think that that's what he meant
Mhm.
other than what was actually meant in the original text? Like, why should I go with this new idea rather than what the
Mhm.
original text he cited meant?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
it seems like if we're gonna go with anything as to what he probably meant, it would be what the text he's citing meant rather than this new idea that clearly is not what the text he's citing means. You
Mhm.
follow me?
Yeah, yeah. And it's a horrible feedback loop too, because if you assume verse 2 is saying that the Son created the universe, um, then it's a feedback loop. It's like that they go back and forth between those two, and it feeds off of each other. And the other point that needs to be said is that um that this is such a momentous revelatory thing that now Jesus is Yod He Vav He, and he's the one who laid the foundations of the earth. And then the author is silent, literally silent about that the rest of the 13 chapters or 15 or
Yeah,
however.
and just
Like not a hint, not a whisper about it for the rest of the sermon. He just like
and
states it and then just moves on.
and just throws in there unqualified that he, this one who supposedly is Yahweh, inherited a name greater than the angels have
Mhm,
and became greater than the angels. Just throws that in there, unqualified, about this one whom supposedly he says breaths later is Yahweh.
mhm,
Like, again, this is just ridiculous.
mhm. Yeah. Um, and it, and the other feedback loop is, of course, the erroneous readings of Colossians 1 and John 1, that all feed into that. Which even John, it's weird. I mean, it's um it's not a coincidence that the verbs in John 1 and Colossians 1 and in Hebrews 1 are all passive with respect to the subject of the word, John 1, uh,
Yeah.
and the Son in Colossians 1 and Hebrews 1. In John 1, it says, uh, by it were all things made.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
and again, it's that passive verb construction. And it's no, I mean, it's understandable because we have that convention in the Old Testament, Psalm 34, Proverbs 3, or is it Psalm 33? We have
Yeah,
this
Psalm
construction,
33. Yeah.
yeah, this construction that's repeated ad nauseum throughout the scriptures, of God by his wisdom establishing the heavens, um, through his understanding stretching out the heavens,
Yes. So it's
by
not so much
through by the breath of his mouth. So are all these persons? I mean, is,
exactly right.
that
Well,
are
and also
doing
just
things, or is it the Father uh creating
exactly.
and establishing, and it's his attributes that are with him doing and helping him do that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to emphasize there. It's not so much that the word is creating, it's that God, by or through his word, is creating. That's the key, I think, point that is emphasized by that passive construction,
Mhm.
both in, as you said, John 1 and Colossians 1.
It's, I like to put it this way, as somebody in the construction and trades, who has an idea of, like, you have a blueprint, and you take the time and the effort to really come up with a good design, and you hope that you use things like ingenuity and innovation and understanding of how things fit together, and then you
Mm.
set out to build a house. I can say that with understanding, I built the house. Um, it's my understanding. It's with me, and I did it with understanding. I did it by understanding. Um, I did it with through tools. I mean, it's like these aren't separate beings from me. I mean, they're just the things that I employ. They're
Or
part
if
of
you,
me. They're with me.
yeah, or if you want to get technical with the whole being person distinction, which I think is illegitimate, as we've discussed in other live streams, but um, it's not another person separate from you,
Mhm.
much less being. It's just not. It's just not a concrete entity separate from you. It's an attribute that belongs to you.
Mhm.
And I think similarly with things like the wisdom and the word of God. Um, but to get back to Hebrews 1, I can't remember, and I wanted to ask you about this. I can't remember if you spent much time or any time um, on the being person issue with the exact
Oh,
hypostasis of his person.
no, I didn't. I briefly just noted that it's hypostasis, which is uh, which is the Trinitarian code
All
word
right.
for person, not nature. And so,
Yes.
even
Yes.
though some, yeah,
Yeah. And in a recent debate, I forget which one it was, but it might have been the recent one with Dustin Smith and James White. I don't recall, but James White was asked about this. And his response, of course, was just like, well, things developed, and you can't expect the biblical authors to speak in the same exact language as the creeds and the councils from several hundred years later as things are developing and being fleshed out and so on and so forth.
mm,
But the point, though, the key point is that the Greek word used is, as you said, hypostasis or hypostasis, as it's often pronounced, which is the conciliar, that is the creedal word meant in contradistinction from ousia, which is being, to
mm,
indicate the persons of the ostensible Trinity.
mm,
And so what you have in Hebrews 1:3, I think is the verse, is Hebrews saying that the author of Hebrews saying that the Son is the exact image of the person of the Father
mhm,
on that conciliar language, not the being or the
mhm,
essence or the substance of the Father, which is just it's proof positive that the apostles, the apostolic writings, are not swimming in the same conceptual waters as the creedal tradition that is supposedly the definition of orthodoxy.
mhm.
The 200, 300 years later. I just find that to be quite ironic.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Um, the um the the anathema declared near the end of the Nicene Council of if anyone declares that the Son and the Father are of a different ousia or hypostasis uh,
Yeah,
of each other, uh, that one is anathema. So they recognized at the time of Nicaea that hypostasis and ousia were synonymous terms. They both meant being,
right.
a person. The and it's and that of course quickly they realized there's a problem if we keep these two synonymous. Now we have to rip them apart and redefine ousia um to be different than it has been and innovate a different meaning for that, lest we um slip into modalism.
Exactly. And that's, Dale Tuggy does a good job, I think, explicating this. But in the intervening period between 325, Nicaea 1, where that anathema you just referred to was uttered, and the second Nicaea 381, Nicaea 2, um, in that intervening period, there was a lot of theological slash political shifts that took place, and I think it's Dale Tuggy's contention, which I find to be immensely plausible, that it's in that intervening period with the Cappadocians in particular. I think Basil, I forget the exact person, but somewhere in there, that the idea that the one God is the Trinity actually came to be prominent. And it was in
Mm,
the Second Nicene Council that was really um, brought to the forefront in the conciliar tradition. Because in the First Nicene Council, it's the idea that the one God is the Trinity is completely absent. It's explicit that the one God is the Father in the First
mm,
Nicene Creed. But it's in that intervening period when they had to grapple with these concepts of hypostasis and ousia, and this this kind of cliche that's come to be definitive of Trinitarianism amongst, I would frankly say, low information thinkers. This whole like person being distinction that gets repeated by people like James White. It's in that intervening period that happened. And you can, and again, the facts that we just pointed out, that the anathema in the First Nicene Council specifically conflates ousia and hypostasis, is the proof, because it's in the later tradition that those two terms become distinct and definitive of the Trinitarian dogma of being versus person. And it's just a theological and political mess. And I don't know why anyone should go along with it instead of just going along with the pretty simple basic declaration of Hebrews 1:3, which is that Yeshua is the exact image of the person and being of the Father. As he said in John 4, what was it, John 14? If you've seen the Father, you've seen me, right?
Yeah,
or if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, rather. Because, as the author of Hebrews says and the author of Colossians says, he's the image of the Father. He's the image of God. Anyway, I could ramble for a while, but those are my basic thoughts on the issue.
I always like what somebody said. I'm trying to remember who it was. They characterized the Trinitarian doctrine as Christianity's self-inflicted wound. It's basically we have deified the Son, and now we have to rack our brains and thread the needle metaphysically and innovate in order to get ourselves out of the problem that we've just created by deifying the Son. It's like you could just not deify the Son.
Well, it's funny because I wrote an article maybe 5 years ago now that was featured on the Trinities blog by Dale Tuggy. And basically what I pointed out there is that theologians like William Lane Craig, ironically, in their effort to bring the Son to the same, to equality with the Father in terms of their divinity, actually end up bringing the Father down to the same level as the Son in terms of not being a God. Now, you have to be fairly familiar with William Lane Craig's particular theory to understand the point that I'm making. But in brief, look, people like William Lane Craig will just outright say that the only true God is the Trinity. And that the Father and the Son and the Spirit, though equal divine persons, none of them count as a God. And that's just the deepest of ironies, because it literally in John 17:3, Jesus himself says that the Father is the only true God. And Jesus himself says that the Father is my God. And so I kind of just jokingly referred to it in that article as the reverse homoousion. the taking of the Father down to the same nature or level as the Son in terms of not actually being a God. Because again, on his interpretation of the tradition of the Bible, it's the Trinity that is the God, and it's none of the persons that are the God. They are divine, but not a God. They're God in terms of being divine, but none of them are a God. That is to say, the God, because that is the Trinity and the Trinity alone. And again, I find that to be ironic.
Then when you press them with questions about that, you can be like James White. I'm not going to answer that. That's a silly question.
Yeah, that trick question referred to the debate recently between Dustin Smith and James White, where Dustin Smith asked a very simple, straightforward question, which is, when you read this text, how many persons are in view? And James White refuses to answer the question. He said, I'm not going to put God in a box and answer where Revelation has not answered.
Sneaky, sneaky, sneaky.
Yeah. But lest all this you know yeehawing here loses the point. The point is that Hebrews 1:3 refers to Jesus as the exact image of the hypostasis, the
Mhm,
person slash being of the Father. That's the point I wanted to make about specifically
mhm.
exegeting slash expositing Hebrews 1. Um, there was another point I was going to make, but I can't remember it, and I guess I'll just leave it there. If I remember it, I'll throw it in the comment. But it was good to see you, brother. God bless
Yeah,
you. I hope to see you
yeah,
again. I do need to hit the road.
awesome. Yeah, yeah, I understand. Yeah, I'm hoping to do another live stream, but the next one is going to be on the Isaiah 28:10, the popular use of line upon line, precept upon
Oh
precept, here a
yes,
little, there a little.
looking forward
I
to
I
that.
want to do like I want to do like a montage, like a mashup of quick video clips of pastors using that as this is how
You
we do
should.
exegesis. We do
Yeah,
line upon line, then precept upon precept, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, yeah. And then and then basically pull out the rug out of the whole thing by showing that that's actually the what people do when they're stumbling like drunkards.
you can do a similar thing with the what is it, First or Second Timothy 2:15, where Paul says, "Rightly dividing the word of truth." Growing up, I had several Bible college instructors and pastors say things like, "Oh, we need to rightly divide the word of truth," and that's their launching pad for so-called dispensationalism. You know, like,
Mhm,
oh, we have to divide up the Bible into these distinct entities where we can identify this is the way God worked with people here, and this is the way God worked with people here, and
mhm.
so on and so forth. You can do a very similar thing with that as you do
Yeah,
with the whole,
true.
line upon line, precept upon precept. That's just not what he meant.
Mhm.
That's not what's going on in that text. Sorry.
'Cause that's what Trinitarians literally do, how they build their God. They do build a God. They play build a God by taking a line here, a line there, precept here,
Yeah.
here a little, there a little, and then they piece their God together.
Yeah. As opposed to what Paul says in Acts 20, which is taking into account the whole counsel of God,
Mhm,
the whole thing as a whole, as it interconnects with each other, overlaps with each other, explains each other, not just these little, proof texts here and there where there's tenuous interpretations that we, act like our hills to die on.
mhm.
But when we take the whole thing into account, we're able to get a better picture. And but before I go, I just want to say for anyone who's watching, subscribe, like, comment, because Jared has been very helpful to me in helping me to have a better understanding of the scriptures and how to truly exegete them rather than just, you know, essentially use them as platforms for my systematic or my denomination or what have you. So I really highly recommend that you follow and continue to support Jared as he does his work. But with that, may God bless you, Jared. I'm going to get going.
Bless you, man. Thank you for coming on and talking. Good night. All right, folks. Thank you for listening in. And and for those who will catch this afterwards and watch. Uh Hope you all have a wonderful evening. God bless you. And think deep.